Boris Johnson has defended the government's change in position on the use of face coverings in secondary schools in England. Pupils will now have to wear masks between lessons in schools in areas where there are local lockdowns. Elsewhere in England, it will be up to head teachers to decide. In Scotland and Northern Ireland, face coverings have to be worn in all secondary schools, in communal areas and corridors in secondary schools. And in Wales, those aged over 11 are recommended to wear them in places where they can't socially distance. Our education editor, Branwen Jeffreys, has more.
I know what this one looks like.
Making himself comfortable at school. The lesson from the Prime Minister today: it's safe to be back. Every precaution is now in place.
If you're in a hotspot area where there is a higher risk of transmission, then face coverings in those types of areas outside the classroom, but not in the classroom, because that's clearly nonsensical. You can't teach with face coverings, and you can't expect people to learn with face coverings. And the most important thing is just wash your hands.
You couldn't sit your exams?
Across Leicester, in another school, some of the Year 11 bubble watched the Prime Minister. Face coverings are optional here, but with friends living with grandparents, many support them.
I think it will protect people and they'll feel safer in school, but because you can have the choice to wear them.
A lot of people from my year group have lived with their grandparents and older relatives, so they really consider about what they do, so they wear masks if they need to.
I have a condition called asthma, but also for the people and students alike and staff as well, and elderly people who I might go and see outside, just for other people's safety too. We can all do our bit, I think.
What a strange and anxious time for teenagers. Schools know many need support, while new routines and rules are put in place.
All secondary schools now have to work out what to do about face coverings. How do you stop teenagers messing around with them? Do you allow any type, any pattern? And what do you do if a child is so anxious they want to wear them almost all the time?
They don't just summarise ideas or explain.
Lessons have been learnt from lockdown. These pupils have got GCSEs next year, so each day they do topics in one subject, a timetable that could move online if needed.
The idea that students are in a class for the day minimises pupil movement around the building. So students go straight to their lesson and they stay in the room, unless of course there's a break or lunch where they're allowed to have some fresh air. If there are other local lockdowns or Leicester finds itself in lockdown again, we've got a really simple plan in place.
After months of lessons missed, fears some children have fallen further behind, that progress closing the gap between rich and poor has stalled, giving schools their biggest challenge in a generation. Branwen Jeffreys, BBC News, Leicester.
So how effective will masks be in schools if they don't need to be worn in classrooms? And how are schools in other countries dealing with it? Our science editor, David Shookman, reports.
The guidance on masks keeps shifting because research into the virus keeps advancing. And although there's no specific advice on schools from the World Health Organization, it does now say that children over the age of 12 should cover their faces where they can't keep 1 metre apart, and that 5 to 11-year-olds could wear masks in areas of high transmission of the virus. Recommendations that were developed with the children's charity UNICEF.
If it can prevent even one additional infection and there's no negative impact on those children who are wearing the mask, then it seems like a sensible and necessary step.
The effectiveness of different masks was investigated by the University of Edinburgh. They're never going to provide a guarantee against infection, but in some situations they do seem to make a difference. So what does the evidence show about face coverings? Well, we know that if someone's infected, maybe without realising, they can pass the virus to anyone nearby, especially if they're somewhere indoors, crowded and with no fresh air. But if that person covers their face, the mask should trap most of the droplets that they would otherwise release, giving some protection to the people around them. And if those people also wear a mask, that should provide a bit of a barrier against infection. So if masks are to be worn in crowded school corridors, why not the classrooms as well? One government advisor, speaking personally, thinks that may eventually come. But he says it's adults, not children, that should be the focus.
Children are not the problem here. It's actually households, multi-generational households, and behaviour in the pubs and the clubs and the restaurants and workplaces and food processing plants. So the focus on children risks stigmatising them, when actually they're the one group that's really suffered.
So what are other countries doing? In parts of Germany, masks in the classrooms are now normal, and that's on top of being careful about hand hygiene. In France, there's a national rule about masks in schools for anyone aged 11 or older. It's seen as an extra measure as infections rise. Most extreme is Thailand, where at this hospital, newborn babies have their faces covered. Whatever the science says, people are deciding themselves how to try to stay safe. David Schuckman, BBC News.